Welcome back to the main room. Again, the level of discussion and debate in the room. It sounds like that you've had a lively hour. I hope you find moving from room to room helpful and useful, and I hope you find the opportunity to take your work from yesterday evening back again into this morning. Welcome as well. So yeah, I hope you've had some good discussions, and we're very much looking forward to hearing from the rooms in a moment. Just before we do that, we are very pleased to have the Climate Change Citizens Assembly coordinators here who are going to make themselves known to us. Susie and her team, Julie and Jamie, if you could stand up at the back and wave. Okay. So they will be reflecting on your work and how we've proceeded, and using a lot of the learning from this Citizens Assembly to take that forward into theirs. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kelly, who is going to coordinate the feeding back from the rooms. So Kelly, thanks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm quite excited to see these presentations, so I won't keep you for too long before we get going. But just to let you know, this is an opportunity for each table individually to present the priority area of action that they've come up with, and to share with the room why they felt that was an important priority area of action. I just want to quickly set kind of the framing for this and a bit of the context in which we're doing it. So what we're doing when you're coming up and presenting your priority area of action is you're saying the following, really. You're saying that at our table, our priority area for action is to deliver a sustainable society where we balance our environmental, economic and social impact for the good of the citizens of the country and its citizens. And that is the thing that is your priority area of action. So this is kind of the frame in which we're doing it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go from table 1 to table 14 in order. You have up to a maximum of 2 minutes, and what we want you to do when you're presenting is to first of all read out what your priority area for action is, and then say why it is important and why you've chosen it. And of course, we're going to try and keep the timings relatively tight, but you've done a brilliant job so far, so I'm not too worried about that. But please just start by sharing what your priority area of action is, because that will make it clearer for everyone else. You have options for how you do this. You can either come to the front of the room here, but just to let you know that if you do come to the front, you will of course be captured on the live stream, because it's part of the way that we show the people of Scotland and everyone watching what's coming out of the assembly. But you can also do it from your tables. So that means you won't be captured on the live stream, but we will pick up the audio. So again, we're still sharing it, but you won't be physically seen on the camera there. So we'll do it however you want to do it, whatever way you're comfortable. You can come up as a 1 or a 2 or as a group. Again, that's completely up to you. But yeah, I think we should get going. We're going to start with table 1. Table 1, take it away. I encourage clapping. Otherwise.
Hello. At table 1, our priority area of action was we want to build an equal society where workers have fair work and pay conditions and a tax system which taxes the wealthy more fairly. We chose this because there's a lot of working poor in this country that are still having to rely on food banks to get by. And there's lots of ways that people are still avoiding tax through this, People are working hard and they're still poor, which in 21st century Scotland, it shouldn't be a thing. So we thought that ways to approach this would be to end 0-hour contracts, to raise the minimum wage, potentially have a maximum wage, as well as making the tax system more transparent and with more worker representation at all levels. Positive impacts we think this would make that people would be happier, they'd have less stress, mental health would generally improve, higher revenue for the country through taxes, and a better standard of living for the working classes, which would in turn, help heal society and make, there's a lot of divisions that would cool it. And the hard choices and trade-offs is potentially some businesses would close, but that's probably quite a short-term thing. Until they kind of figure it out. Because if you can't afford to pay your workers a fair wage, should you be in business? Probably not. And if it's not done right, the cost could be added to the public expenditure. But here we go. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Table 1. We're going to move on to Table 2. Come on up. So just something to say, as people are talking, if there are any notes you want to make them however works for you. But also if there's anything you want to clarify from what they said, we have a process for getting clarifications from Table later on. But I'm going to hand over to you now. Go.
After you, take it away.
So from Table 2, every business needs to comply with new eco-laws which serves the need of the citizens first and foremost, and that includes free accessible public transport for all, an effective environmental tax system, and the requirement for all new homes to be eco-homes that are accessible via a government-issued eco-mortgage issued at a preferential rate to support access to the housing market.
Thank you. So our approach, our mindset, and this is pan-political, younger, more mature, gay, straight, male, female, we've got everything at our table. I love it. It's a real rainbow alliance, but we decided this was the most solution-focused approach that we could come up with, and we believe it to be environmentally, socially, and ethically connected in how we would like our society to be. We want it to work for all citizens, and the positive impact of that we'd shared as a group were that we thought, well, by thinking, sort of acting locally but thinking globally, we could, it would foster the creation of new jobs, training opportunities, education, change societal mindsets. In the long run, we would like to see, housing not just affordable but a right for every citizen, a legal right. Hopefully reduce inequality, breaking or at least slowing down, minimising the poverty cycle, and in places like Glasgow, where I'm originally from, increasing lifespan, longevity, and a big thing that's close to all our hearts, I think, is improving people's mental health across all sectors. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Table 3.
Hello, this is Table 3. We would like to see an affordable, state-owned and improved public transport that is a joined-up, countrywide policy.
The positive impacts of this would be it would open up the community and opportunities and jobs. It gets people out of cars, therefore emissions are down. People would be more active and healthy. It breaks down the car-first attitude. Less people would feel isolated and perhaps interact more, and it would be cheaper for households.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Table 4.
Our actions are fairer use of personal and corporation tax and using tax as an incentive and disincentive for environmental sustainability.
The positive impact that we feel this will have, the fairer use of tax will improve the health, the education, if we spend and invest in these areas. We believe the fairer use of tax will reduce the poverty. Tax incentives and disincentives will improve the environment by reducing the carbon emissions as well.
Smaller. We've talked about the hard choices and the trade-offs. When you mention the word tax, nobody likes to think that tax is being raised because we work hard. However, at our table, we talked about what the trade-offs for that would be. If we did see tax as more of a positive, raising tax rather than it being negative, being able to see what the trade-offs are. And starting at a young age, I think it's been ingrained in society that raising tax is quite negative. If we start off at a younger age to see raising taxes as more positive because this is what we get. This is the trade-off. If we raised personal tax, corporation tax, There's examples of this in other countries have done it, Scandinavian countries. Some of the benefits that we could have, or the choices, would be cleaner communities, cleaner parks. Again, that would impact on the well-being of people, being able to walk to the park, it's nice and clean. Do we want better education? Do we want a better NHS? There's got to be a trade-off. It's hard choices. Where we could see visual examples for people of where the tax is going. If you could actually see your local swing park, the children using it, it's nice and clean, that's perhaps people would then accept that the tax is having to go up for reasons. Again, it would be given better pay so people wouldn't use food banks. I know my colleague said that, but it all ties in, it's a cycle, it goes round. And I think we have to keep that real. Where's the money going to come from? We have to raise money. You know, if I want something, there's a trade-off, i.e. new shoes, then I can't have the night out on the Friday. So we as individuals, we have this trade-off. So I think, you know, as a country, we have to think about trade-offs.
Brilliant, thank you. Oh. Brilliant, thank you so much. Table 4, Table 5.
Table 5, hello. Table 5 has, so our priority area for action to deliver a sustainable future is to build an energy efficient country. And we believe that there will be great health benefits by doing so. And that will involve as well reduced pollution by creating more green spaces, improve city infrastructure. We believe that will promote healthier lifestyles in the communities, bring the communities together, and also will make our environment cleaner. And we also believe there are great economical benefits of that, and it will provide a lot of opportunity for people, create new jobs, new businesses, and reduce energy costs, hopefully, and allow us to export some excess energy and become a competitive country.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Table 5. Table 6, please.
Morning. Table 6, we have what we think is a marvellous aspiration, and that being to invest and harness Scotland's renewable energy, which we were told yesterday is estimated to be 25% of Europe's potential, which is absolutely amazing. So Scotland has the opportunity to become a world leader in an industry which is vital to the future prosperity of not only Scotland, but of the world. This would provide the greatest number of positive benefits for Scotland and its people. Kirsty?
We felt some of the positive impacts would include a cleaner, healthier environment, improvements in export and trade relations. This would in turn help increase income generation. It could provide a platform for research into different forms of renewable energy. It could reduce reliance on fossil fuels and reduce carbon emissions, increase the electricity from renewables, and it could fulfil all energy needs in the future. It would increase job creation and hopefully provide cheaper energy costs.
Such marvellous benefits, but obviously there will be some hard choices and trade-offs, as there are in all great objectives in life. There will be, we'll have to raise the necessary investment. There will be a loss of EU funding, which people often don't take into account. Disruption to people's lives, you know, NIMBYism, possibly a disruption to the to the inshore fishing industry. There'll be an impact on landscapes, and obviously determining where the authority lies. Is it reserved or is it devolved? But anyway, these are just challenges, and with a positive approach, I'm sure we can prevail as a country. Thank you.
please.
Table 7, our priority area of action is to reshape employment regulations such as abolishing zero-hour contracts and private employment agencies, and to ensure everyone has good, fair work that meets their needs and invest in their development.
Some of the positive impacts of this would be improved mental health and well-being, people being more committed to their workplace, greater financial stability, benefit to the economy from the tax income, better work-life balance, companies signing up to disability regulations which are fair, but obviously some hard choices, and the hard choices that we imagined were potential resistance from companies that are used to having a flexible / exploited workforce, and perhaps some companies going out of business as a result of that. And the enforcement and the policing of all of this could be difficult and challenging, and the reshaping of employment law and regulations, which should be done quickly and need to be done quickly, could also be a very challenging task. Thank you.
Thank you, Table 7. Table 8, come on up.
Good morning. Our action is that the government needs to raise some sort of money to meet the opportunities of for us to be a sustainable country. And this could be done through many different things. Taxation, locally, nationally, and to the companies, investing in and rewarding the positive behaviour, and also penalising negative behaviour. And I'm just going to pass you on to David.
Thank you. We are proposing this for a number of reasons. There will be short-term and obviously long-term impacts. The short-term impact would be we would generate much more money. We would then make the system fairer, and that's very important that the system becomes fairer. We would increase the of sustainability, and again that's very important to take the citizens of the country with us. The long-term benefits would be companies are given time to adapt and change. No company likes to have something thrown on them. They need time to adapt, to change, to make a difference. Costs are reduced and sustainability is increased with this method. There will be environmental improvements, and of course there'll be positives when it comes to health improvements, and particularly mental health, which is a big issue at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Table 8. Table 9. Liam, come on up.
So our priority area of action is create positive destinations for young people. This includes jobs, training, volunteering, college and apprenticeships. The positive impact would be an increased confidence, self-esteem, a sense of belonging and creation of a support network. It would have less reliance on the state and earners putting money back into the system, essentially becoming consumers. Save money in the long term, reducing the impact on services such as drug and alcohol services and mental health services. And it would break the cycle of dependency.
Yeah, so the hard choices for this are, as another table said, where does the money come from? We were looking at like a level of penalty maybe to companies that maybe don't want to incorporate in with the tax, and if they don't want to comply with the living wage. Trade-offs where obviously we have to increase tax somewhere, but should it be obviously making a wee bit more money towards the state and better public services, and trying to actually encourage people that that's where it's going, show them that that's where it's going. We were saying earlier on that actually you don't see the visual of where your taxes are going. Also, should we cap public should we cap public taxing for like private profits, so landlords and all that kind of stuff? Yeah, that was it.
Thank you, Table 9. Table 10. Come on up.
Our priority was that every citizen must be better educated and informed about why their actions are essential to maintain our beautiful green country. We've already started a little Twitter campaign, SOS Save Our Scotland, on the table. Some of the positive impacts, we have a better quality of life. We're officially the most beautiful country in the world. We need to keep that, you know. Savings that local communities could make becoming energy efficient need to be put back in the community. You could build play areas for kids so kids become fitter, less dependent on the NHS. We become more energy efficient. People are likely to take action if they see a positive. All we see these days is negative, negative. If you actually inform people, this is what your actions have done. Little Jimmy putting his food in the bin, you know, this is what little Jimmy's done, this is what he's done. Some of the choices, we need to make incentives to people to change their mindsets. Taxation on glass. We heard about the sugar tax because it had a massive impact on diabetes. There's bottles on these tables. Companies don't produce water, they produce plastic. So let's start charging them. You know, if you want to produce a plastic bottle, you're going to pay 10p a bottle on that. If you produce glass, we won't charge you. Let's make more companies more green efficient. We need to change the mindset, and to do that we need to educate the kids and the people of Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Table 10. Table 11, please. Come on up.
Good morning. Table 11 is all about transport. Addressing this encapsulates many of the problems we have: obesity, isolation and climate. There are costs and benefits of this. For example, if we get rid of half the cars, this would reduce pollution, which would benefit the climate.
Yeah, so if we reduce car journeys even by half, that would have a profound effect on CO2 output. But this is really predicated on having a solid transport network or having decent infrastructure for electric vehicles, for instance. Because there's a serious opportunity cost for taking public transport rather than just driving yourself to somewhere. Because every minute you spend driving somewhere is a minute you aren't at work, for instance. So it has to be some level of parity with reliable trains, reliable buses, etc. We thought that this was quite a pragmatic decision because of the nature of our current constitutional framework, but it's potentially something that these other things could potentially be brought forward by the next Citizens' Assembly.
Brilliant. Thank you, Table 11. Table 12, please.
Hi everyone. Our group at Table 12 would like to build on Scotland's national framework, performance framework, by increasing investment in sustainable development, science and technology and Scottish manufacturing. To do that.
The reason we want to do this is because we want to make Scotland a world leader in sustainable energy production and innovative technology. We also want to develop a high-skilled and sustainable workforce in well-paid jobs and promote equal training opportunities. We also want to provide an export opportunity to decrease our reliance on oil and fossil fuels, and we want to help raise awareness and educate population on sustainable development and socio-economic issues.
Oh, no.
There's more, there's more.
The trade-off to this would be a challenge with a transition period away from fossil fuels to clean energy, which could impact on jobs, especially high-quality, well-paid jobs in the oil industry. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Table 12. Table 13, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Here is the news from Table 13. If you've been sleeping, you'll not know, but we're coming to tell you there is a climate emergency, and it's been escalated to a national emergency. And in those times, we have a national plan. And this one is for 30 years, which politicians from every party signs up to. And the plan will deliver, as we're all sharing the same objective, a sustainable country, balancing environment, economic and social impact for the good of the country and its citizens. There will be specific milestones and targets for politicians at all levels, from national down to local authorities. And as been mentioned earlier, each one of the different departments and objectives need to report on that so that we're all heading in the same direction.
Okay, there will be many positives. There will be many positives if the goals are achieved. Positive impacts would encourage politicians to work together, pledge to commit to the plan. They will be more accountable, and it would encourage joint working, like cross-party, to build on a national performance framework. The hard choices would be rebalancing of budgets and change of priorities, but we would have a measurable, and it may be difficult for an environment for politicians. So we would also recommend that we have a citizens' assembly type at local level to feed back to the citizens of the cities.
Brilliant. Thank you, Table 13. And our final table, Table 14. Come on up.
Good morning. Table 14, we propose to change the environment, to change the economic balance by changing the tax system. That would be the lever to make changes to improve sustainability, first in the environment, by investing in research to create new technologies to combat the climate change, to create a fairer economy to eradicate poverty, and to increase quality of life for all citizens by better housing, healthcare, education, and transport. Thank you.
Oh, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for your hard work, both yesterday and this morning, and for all those that just came and did their presentations on behalf of their groups. So what we're going to do now is I think we probably need to absorb that a little bit and reflect on some of the things that we've heard. So what we're going to do until the break, and the break will be at 11:10, is just have some conversations at our tables about what we've heard. But also, if there are any points of clarifications that you might need from another table, so you're not entirely sure what they meant by what they said at some point, please try and draw that out, and your table facilitators will be coordinating in the break to try and get you some clarifications. And we're doing that in advance of the session that's coming later, where Chris and Alan will be back to look at everything that you've come up with and tell you a bit more about the constitutional implications of them. And then later in the day, we'll be doing a vote on the levels of support for each of your priority areas of action. So the text of your priority area of actions will be up on the screen, and we'll be voting on them. So yeah, let's get chatting and clarifying and all that good stuff. All right, see you.
Yep, I think everybody's here now, so thank you very much. And can I just share some information that there is actually air conditioning in this room? I had thought there wasn't. If we keep the doors closed, counterintuitively, the temperature will go down, I'm told. Okay, so thank you very much for coming back. We are now moving into the slot with Chris and Alan, thank you. So this is kind of to reflect on the constitutional aspects of our conversation and to reflect again on where power lies in relation to the actions that you have drawn together. Chris and Alan will be able to have had a chance to look at the statements that you have prepared, and they'll be covering off some of the queries that arise around the constitutional implications of that. And they'll be drawing this out, kind of where power lies. Maybe it may be national, maybe EU, it may be local government, but also some of the power may lie in communities and citizens. And so for future weeks, we'll be thinking about our recommendations in terms of who can make decisions about things and where decisions lie. And it's important to be clear with our recommendations, who is it who needs to act on those actions, and where should we be placing our where should we be placing these statements to make sure they have the most impact? So I'm going to hand over to Chris and Alan, and they're going to have some reflections on your statements, and then there's going to be a Q&A where you can question things more clearly. Thanks, Chris.
I don't know whose idea it is to follow up such an inspirational session with a talk from a lawyer, but here we go. So good morning, everyone. It's good to see you again. Last night, Alan and I had a chance to look at the emerging themes that were coming out. I think that the best way to use the limited time that we have this morning is to pick out some of those key themes and explore some of the issues that come out of Where Power Lies There. And then we'll have time, having taken that more general approach, I'll have time to go round tables where necessary to speak to you about specific action points and queries you might have. And I think in coming sessions, you'll also have the opportunity to take a more deep dive into where power lies in relation to these things and to target your interventions. The first thing I think I would start with was a really interesting question that was asked to the expert witnesses or the expert presenters yesterday, which I think came from up in this corner of the room, Anne, who said that is sustainability devolved or reserved? What a big question. And the answer to that question is it's complicated. And it's complicated because sustainability isn't a single policy area that requires action and therefore fits neatly into devolved or reserved matters. To talk about sustainability is to require the development of policy, and it's to require action in a whole host of policy areas, some of which are devolved, some of which are reserved, some of where the powers are shared, some that require action at the EU level, some that require action at a local level. And so I've picked out 3 examples from the actions that have come out that will hopefully help us to understand some of the complexities involved in that. So take, first of all, the aspiration to tackle climate change. That's been a major theme of the presentations that we've heard. It's been a major theme of the interventions from the room and the statements, even some of the statements that are not directly orientated towards climate change, have somehow a sustainable climate and sustainable energy and so on underpinning them, or as kind of co-benefits from them. Well, the first thing to say about an aspiration to impact on climate change is that climate change is largely a devolved area. The Scottish Government has legislated in this area in 2009 and in 2019. It's imposed duties on the Scottish ministers to require 75% cut in emissions from a 1990 baseline by 2030, and for Scotland to be carbon neutral by 2045. These are ambitious targets. Some people might argue they're not ambitious enough, but in comparative terms, they're broadly reasonably ambitious targets that have been legislated by the government in this kind of space. But we need to qualify this in a number of ways. One is that so much of climate change is regulated at the EU level. So some of the measures that we need to take are driven by measures that exist at the EU level. And so post-Brexit, it remains to be seen, as powers return to the UK or to the devolved areas, how we can drive policies in those areas. There's an awful lot of discussion that needs to be done at the UK and devolved levels to replicate some of those EU protections and hopefully to rise above them. Another thing is that effective change needs cooperation. Okay? So we need cooperation with the UK government. We need cooperation with local government to drive these changes. We need cooperation with the UK government because climate change needs big, major, ambitious shifts in terms of energy. Energy is a broadly and quite tightly reserved matter. So things like coal, gas, oil, the regulation of the energy markets are all tightly reserved. And these are things that could have significant impacts on the way in which we tackle climate change. So we need to think about how we interact between the devolved and the UK level if action is to be meaningful. Equally, we need to think about how we can interact from the devolved down to the local government level. Local governments can use land planning laws, for example. Local governments have powers over the work parking levy that they can use to nudge people to use cars less and to find alternative means of getting to work. But the point is that this isn't a self-contained area that we can do alone as a nation. It's something that requires work within the nation up towards the UK, down towards local government, and it requires action internationally and supranationally. We still have to work with the EU on these things, whether we're a member state or part of that state or not. Take, for example, the aspiration towards fair work. Now, employment law and equality, again, are very tightly reserved matters, and this was the source of real debate when it came to the Smith Commission. Trade unions, the Labour Party, divided on the question within Smith of whether we should devolve employment powers or whether those are better exercised at the UK level to have standard workers' rights across the country. There seems to be a bit of a change there. But what it does mean is that things like the living wage, things like trade union rights, things like health and safety, are mainly driven from the UK level. If we want hard sanctions and meaningful legislative impact, then the UK level is the primary legislature for that. But this isn't a council of despair. There are things that we can do now. That is, for example, the Scottish Government uses procurement processes to say, well, OK, if you want to provide services into the Scottish Government, show us that you use the living wage, that you apply the living wage. Otherwise, we'll look for those services elsewhere. Okay, so there are things that can be done even within existing powers. Even if we say that broadly energy is reserved, that workers' rights are reserved, there are ways in which within the powers we have, we can softly begin to make the steps in the right direction before asking the big constitutional questions, well, should those powers come here? Is there an argument actually that we should have greater control over these powers? And then finally, the aspiration to recalibrate the economy. Again, most taxes are reserved. The UK controls corporation tax, national insurance, VAT, inheritance tax, most motoring taxes, and taxation generally. So if we want to think about imaginative new taxes on wealth, then we have to look first at the UK level to implement those. But we've seen significant changes in this area, even in 20 years of devolution. We've seen the devolution of air passenger duty. We've seen devolution of income tax. We've seen devolution of various other smaller taxes. The point is that the sites of these powers are a movable feast. They can change with the right political tools and incentives. We can argue for the devolution of these things. And within the powers that we do have, we can try to make a difference. I'll give you an example in terms of air passenger duty. That was something that the government, having had devolved, intended to reduce and then to cut in order to stimulate the use of Scottish airports in the tourist trade. But people made a difference here. Citizens made a difference here. Citizens generating that backlash against too cautious approach to climate change said, well, if the Scottish Government is to take seriously its declaration of a climate emergency, how is that compatible with reducing taxes on air travel? And the Scottish Government, therefore, reversed its policy in that direction. Okay, now I've only got 30 seconds or less than 30 seconds. All of this is just to say that you've picked big, important, meaty areas of consideration. This is not a council of despair. The power to affect change exists. The question for us is to determine where does it exist, how does it exercise, how can we influence it, and can we begin to think about where that power should lie in the future? Those are all recommendations that you're well placed to make. Okay, thanks very much.
Good morning, all. So Chris was talking there about where power lies, who has the power to do stuff, and it's clear that that's really, really important if we're trying to think about how to achieve the kinds of actions that you've been talking about this morning. But it was really striking particularly I think during your discussions yesterday, just before lunch yesterday, when you were reflecting on the political panel, that you don't need me to tell you that to achieve the kinds of objectives that you're interested in, we also need to think about how we do politics. So not just about where the power lies, but also how we use that power, how we exercise power. So the sorts of changes you're talking about would involve focusing on the long term, so trying to get politics away from just focusing on the kind of 5-year electoral cycle that politicians sometimes seem to be kind of trapped into. It involves making really big changes, and changes that might be quite difficult and quite challenging for many, many people, but doing that in a way that protects Oh, have I just gone off? I've gone back on again. Protects vulnerable people and kind of carries people along, carries public support along all the way. And it's really important that people feel they can trust the political system and trust politicians, that they're doing their best, that they're trying to deliver in the interests of everyone around the country. So it's really important that we do think about how we do politics in order to achieve these outcomes, because it seems to me that it's not obvious that doing politics the way we currently do it is going to deliver that kind of really big change. So during the session before lunch yesterday, you brought up a whole range of different ways in which we might do that. And I thought I'd just say a little bit more about 3 of those, just to pick up on the ideas that you were having yesterday. So one of these ideas was the idea of making politics less adversarial, so encouraging more cross-party cooperation, getting politicians to work with each other a bit more. And I think it's obvious that that would be a good thing in many, many ways. It would, hopefully it would help the politicians and others to focus on what actually is the best decision in any particular issue, rather than just fighting with each other. It might help ensure that everyone's interests across society are properly taken into account. Would hopefully help us to think about the long term in politics as well. At the same time, politics involving a lot of cross-party cooperation isn't necessarily perfect. So we might end up getting basically the lowest common denominator coming out. So we might end up with the really bland, unimportant stuff that everyone can agree on being decided, rather than making some of the tough decisions that we need to make. And also, if all of the politicians are involved in making particular decisions, then which ones do we hold to account when things don't go well? How do we change things in politics if all the politicians are cooperating all the time? So cross-party cooperation, definitely a good thing, but we need to be careful as well in just thinking about how we do it. And also how we achieve it is not straightforward. So, we can say more cross-party cooperation, less adversarial politics would be great, but how do we actually get there? So one of the ideas that was brought up yesterday was having a proportional system for electing the Scottish Parliament. Well, we already have a proportional system for electing the Scottish Parliament, so that might help, but it doesn't solve the problem. Would it be better to have more work to change how Parliament works? So that there's a bigger role for the committees where the parties do collaborate with each other rather more. Or maybe we need to think more about this kind of forum, citizens' assemblies and these kinds of things. It was quite striking yesterday, and some of you mentioned it to me yesterday, how differently the politicians spoke to you compared to how they speak through the media. And they knew that just giving you sound bites wasn't going to win you over, because you're seriously engaged in thinking about this stuff. So if we can have this kind of forum and get the politicians engaging with this kind of forum, maybe that improves how they work with each other as well. And that leads on to the second idea that you were talking about, which was bringing ordinary people, regular people, members of the public, into politics rather more. And citizens' assemblies, so I think citizens' assemblies are great. That's why I'm here. And they're a great way of doing many, many things. At the same time, they're quite expensive. They require a lot of commitment from you, the members of the assembly. So we can't have citizens' assemblies on everything. So it's important to think about other ways of bringing people into politics as well. And one way that comes up from a lot of the tables is maybe we should localize politics more. We should have more focus on local communities and people in their communities making a difference to their own lives. So you've talked about a lot of the benefits of doing that, and I think those are pretty clear. At the same time, again, there are downsides to doing that. Sometimes we need coordinated action across a wider area in order to achieve the big changes that we want to achieve. So again, thinking about just where community empowerment is desirable and how best to do it is a really important thing to consider further. And then the third area that I wanted to pick up, which again came from a lot of the tables yesterday, was improving information about politics, getting good quality information out there. So it's not just you who can listen to Chris talking about tax. But everyone can hear the information that's important about policy decisions, about the options that are available, about the strengths and weaknesses of different options, all these kinds of things. So again, I think giving more information and improving the quality of information in politics is definitely a good thing. It would be difficult to argue against that. But there's a question about how we can best do that. How can we ensure that good quality information is available out there? So one idea that got a big cheer yesterday when it was mentioned was, well, maybe we should punish politicians who lie. So I've done quite a lot of work on this. It's actually quite difficult to do that well, and there's a danger that you can actually make things worse if you try to go down that route. We don't have time. I'm in my last minute already, just to talk about why, but just let's think about it a bit further. So I think we need to think about how do we actually get good quality information out there? Could the BBC be doing a better job? Do we need to have some kind of new body that is responsible for thinking about how do we improve the quality of information? Citizens' assemblies, again, can play a really important role. What you say to the people of Scotland as a whole, in terms of what you think are the issues that matter, what you will say about what further information you think needs to go out there, that's really important. And then more broadly, and very finally, because I've been told to stop, education in schools. Again, a lot of you have talked about that, and what we can do in order to educate people in issues, but also in how to engage with issues, is really, really important. I'll stop there. So now we're doing a bit of a Q&A again. Are we self-chairing? Self-chairing, okay. So do you want to have just, yesterday you were doing this thing, just having a little chat among yourselves with your neighbour, just for a minute before you ask questions, which is a really useful way of just reflecting on what's been said before you. So do you want just a minute talking with your neighbour before we go directly to questions? Okay, everyone. So hopefully you've had a little chance to think about some questions that came up there. We are, as ever, very keen to have questions from all sorts of different people in the Assembly. So who'd like to kick us off? We've got some microphones with Kayla and Tim. And first question to Shirley.
I don't want to bore everybody, but what you were saying really touched on some of the stuff that I had wanted to ask the politicians, and I touched on it. And it kind of, so I'm just going to go over, you're saying it's really complex, you know, the system of politics. You know, see in the real world, in jobs, we have supervisors, we have transparency, we have governing bodies, you know. And if we say we're going to do something at work, whatever it is, or we're asked to do, and we don't deliver, we're out the door eventually. You know, and I think it's so complex. How do you complain, you know, on a mass scale that a politician said, oh, I'm going to do this, so we'll vote you in. It's been a lie, we've not come up with it. And it doesn't seem to go anywhere because it's very complex. You know, as I say, in the real world, you wouldn't get away with that. You don't give what you're going to say you're going to deliver, then a manager, a supervisor, a governing body is going to come along and say, you're not doing your job, we don't want you anymore, we're going to replace you. Now, I know you do that through voting, but how can it be done quicker?
Yeah, great question. So the idea is that that's what happens at elections, but there's one problem, yeah, as you say, it's just once every 5 years. And another problem is often we don't have the information in order to make that judgment really well. And, you know, we've got the newspapers and so on shouting at us to go one way or another. It's quite difficult to make that decision. So the more you have lots of ways in which people can engage with politicians between elections, so citizens' assemblies, local participation, all these kinds of things, the more opportunities there are to start to hold the politicians to account. So I think that, combined with better information, starts to get us in that direction at least.
Can I just add, there's also a broader cultural thing that can affect this as well, which is that when politicians come into power, they often don't have the full knowledge of, well, how much money really is, what levers can we pull, what can we do. Then when they go back on something, we paint it as a public or as a media or whatever, or reverse embarrassing climb down. And so we disincentivise people from, from being honest and open about the difficult decisions that they have to make. So I think part of a citizens' assembly, and part of the civic education that people said was important, is making citizens themselves thinking about the type of political culture to which they contribute.
One here.
Okay, I'm just following on. Our table had a discussion after some of the things you said, and one of it was if we can sort of punish, in inverted commas, the politicians by taking something from their salary and say, well, you promised us this, you haven't done it, so you don't deserve that money. And also, a lot of people at the table were saying that a lot of politicians have more than one job. So perhaps if you're a politician, you have to give up your other jobs and focus fully on the job of being the politician.
Yes. So I guess the interesting question, the important question there is who decides? So, if we have the courts making these kinds of decisions, or yesterday there was a suggestion that the Electoral Commission should be empowered to make this kind of decision, that puts them in a politically very, very sensitive position. And the danger is that whatever decision they make, they're accused of being part of the establishment and being corrupt themselves, and it's not a fair process. So can you find a way of doing that that avoids that kind of danger? I guess that's the concern that I would have. The aspiration sounds like a great aspiration, but it's the practicality of how you get there, I think, that needs to be thought through. Do we have one here? Yeah. And then we'll come over here.
Since we're talking about politicians, I've been wanting to ask this question from yesterday. Would it be possible to develop a policy whereby politicians should spend 6 months integrated community service in the different sectors as they go along? It could be before or as they go along their career, so that they know exactly what other people do. Example, in the hospital, push trolleys, help to clean, and the bucket people spend time there, so they do integrated community service. It could be a policy whereby they know exactly, spend some time in McDonald's with that wage, not getting the politician wage, but the McDonald's wage for that month.
Yeah, doesn't sound like an unreasonable idea to me. We'll see what the politicians say about it. So we've got a question here.
Along this theme of, you said punishing elected reps would be difficult. And at our table we talked about that. And what we said, everybody makes mistakes. So there are genuine people who make mistakes, that they're doing the job or whatever. Just reflecting on what he said just now, a lot of elected representatives come from ordinary lives and they have held ordinary jobs. They're not all, high-powered people. But where it comes to the punishing of it, I think the Electoral Commission has to step up a bit and deal with people. As I said, they make mistakes. People do make mistakes, but anything that is deliberately misleading, that's where our table were speaking about. They should be taken into account.
And it's genuinely the case that most politicians are good people. They went into politics because they want to achieve good and important goals. I think the difficulty sometimes is how do they retain sight of those goals once they've gone into the political world? And Actually, our political system is in many ways better than many other political systems at doing that, because our politicians have much more connection with their constituents than in many other countries. They work a lot with people. They speak with people a lot more than in many countries where politicians really are very distant. So I think that is an important point. And on politicians making misleading statements. So again, so one difficulty again is who judges? Who judges whether statements are misleading? The other is there's a danger that politicians can kind of abuse that sort of process. So, famous example, think back to the Brexit referendum. Everyone knows about £350 million on the side of a bus. Everyone knows that was false. Yeah, there's no disagreement about whether it was false or not. Everyone on all sides of the argument knows that it was false. Why was that number being used? Because it focused attention on the fact that we send lots of money to the EU. And using a false number meant that there was a lot of people saying, hey, no, that's not the right number, but that just focused attention on the fact that it's quite a big number, and whether it's 350 million, 250 million, it's still a big number. So politicians can abuse the opportunity to, can abuse a system where you catch them out from making misleading statements. I think it's really, really important to be careful about how we deal with that. Do we have, I think we've got time for one more question only. We've got, we've got two. So let's take them two very, very quickly, and then we'll see how we go. So first one here.
Hello. When big issues come up for the government, a lot of MPs go back to their constituents and ask, how do you feel about this? And they get a feedback from their constituents. The problem being, when they go back to Parliament, they've got to follow the whip in the vote. And that, to me, seems very strange that the constituents don't get a say in the Parliament because of the whip. And I think it's about time that we look at ways of getting rid of the party whip.
A point here as well. A microphone is coming. There you go.
Probably a question for Chris, I would think, in regards to where we stand legally at the moment. Can I ask, in regards to the sort of post-Brexit arena that we're in at the moment, how involved is the Scottish Government in post-Brexit talks in regards to the issues that we've talked about, environmental sustainability, employment, and and what else? What the rest? Do we have in a legally binding framework that must be adhered to? Because we've got two split ideologies, and in regards to what the people want, I know we've been through all this before, but you've been talking about that you can do a bit of horse trading here and there, and Brexit sort of post-apocalypse. 31st of January is fastly approaching. Whenever it's going to happen. The people, where do we stand in that in regards to this and the bigger question, and what may become of us all?
This is a big question to answer in what I suspect is a short period of time. But partly the answer is I'm not entirely sure, because a lot of what's going on in terms of Brexit negotiation is conducted at a high level and behind closed doors, and these are discussions that we try as academics to access, and from sometimes we're invited in. But what I referred to yesterday is powers return. There's been a dispute about at what level should they return to the UK or to the devolved areas, where it's a devolved kind of sphere of competence. It looks like powers returning to the devolved area, with the UK having the opportunity to freeze the exercise of those powers where they think there's a need for a common framework, so where it's better. So agriculture might be devolved, but would it disrupt the UK's internal market? Would it, if you have different standards and agriculture standards in Scotland, different labelling in Scotland as you do in the rest of the United Kingdom? So we might better think of a common UK framework, right? So there's lots of discussions that have to take place between the governments to determine what are the areas that are appropriate to have these kinds of common frameworks, what sorts of inputs or where is the kind of balance of input that takes place at that? And I think, I mean, Ian is probably the person who's best placed to answer this rather than me, because he's been involved in this, some of this work. Some UK government departments are better than others at giving Scottish government counterparts access to discussions that take place in the European Union in those terms. Some departments are very, very good at it, allowing Scottish government officials to come along and to participate in discussions. Others are very, very jealously guard that. So I suspect it's a mixed bag. And in terms of where we are right now, where we go in the future, I am about. The theme of positive engagement. I think we might. I'm just getting a signal that we might have to move on. If I can just very quickly answer these two things, and then I'll hand back to Alan to finish. On the whips, and one of the unspoken things about the whip is, people go and they march the blind for the vote for the government's position, but that's also a means of accountability, because you elect a government to see through a certain manifesto commitments, and we want people to be bound by the manifesto promises that they make. And so the whip is one way of making sure that the government is able to deliver on the promises that it makes. So we have to be careful. The whip can maybe have an overbearing effect, but we have to be careful when we talk about eradicating it entirely, because it is itself a means of holding the government to account. And the last thing that I just wanted to say is, as Citizens' Assembly, talking about means of sanctioning politicians, I'm not personally so keen on sanctions. I think encouraging positive behaviour that also comes from the media and the citizens. But if you are thinking about things like more teeth for the Electoral Commission, you have to incentivise politicians to do things that are not in their interests. That's why, in terms of these things, you as a Citizens' Assembly are well placed to make recommendations about this, to reach above politicians who have a self-interest here, and to think about the ways and to send a message from Scotland as to how you think politicians should be held to account and why it's in the greater interest to do that. So I think this is a big task for the Citizens' Assembly.
Good. I think our time is more than up, so we're handing back to Kate. Great.
Thank you very much, Chris and Alan, and our questioners. I think you can get the sense that we're kind of, everything that we're doing is kind of building blocks as we move along through our journey, and we will get an opportunity to revisit some of these very meaty issues as we go along. What we're going to do now is take an opportunity to use our voting keypads again in the middle of the room, or in the middle of the tables, sorry. We felt it would be a useful exercise to reflect on your 14 statements and gather in the feeling of support within the room for each statement. I think this will work in terms of you as individuals kind of registering your support for each statement. Also for us to reflect on how the Assembly feels about these statements. It's not a definitive thing, but it's to show the support. And also this is going to be very useful in taking your statements out to the wider country and the wider world, so that people can see what the feeling in the room is, and then they can maybe reflect on it out with the room as well. Now, as yesterday, I will be working with my fantastic assistant, Chris, who knows exactly what we're doing. And we're going to test just a first question with you. I'll just ad-lib here for a moment. We're going to test a question with you, which is going to have a couple of reasons of doing that. Is just to get back in the feeling for voting, getting used to the keypads again, but also introducing the idea that there's more than 2 numbers on the keypad. We're going to be using numbers 1 to 5 this morning. Would that be correct? That is correct. So we've set up just a test run, which will be appearing. Yes, sorry, I'm putting Chris under a tremendous amount of pressure here. I do apologise. Yeah. And after the vote test, to try out the 1 to 5 numbers and to get the feel for it, you're going to have a chance to reflect on the tables and then vote. Sorry, that wasn't clear. Yeah, sorry. So we're going to try a test. Can we operate with numbers 1 to 5? Then you've got a chance to reflect on the statements, and then we'll come back to get your levels of support. Okay. And by the magic of technology, Chris. Fantastic. So the electronic voting. Okay, has everybody got one of the little electronic voting pads in their hands? Yes. Okay, so the first question, just to try this out, is which would you support as the Citizens' Assembly biscuit? Okay, so if you favour tea cakes, press number 1. Well, we're not going to specify a brand because there are many tea cakes available. If you want to imagine in your head the tea cake that you would favour, please go on ahead. And also imagine a gluten-free tea cake and a vegan tea cake, okay? So you can imagine in your head. If you favour tea cakes, press number 1. If you favour shortbread, number 2. If you favour a snowball, which I've already heard there's debate as to whether that's a biscuit at all, but anyway, it's in there. Number 3, if you favour a caramel wafer, non-determined brand, number 4, and if you feel to address our health and obesity issues, we shouldn't have any biscuits, please press number 5. Okay, so if I can give you a moment to reflect on that and cast your votes, please. Okay, final votes coming in. 3, 2, 1, go. Well, there you go. The votes are in. That's an admirable vote for none. Well done, everybody. But it's clear that a caramel wafer of many different brands is supported as the Citizens' Assembly biscuit. Okay, thank you. So, and actually, interestingly, we got 105 votes for that, which is higher than any of the votes we got yesterday. So, I don't know what that says. Right. You've got a couple of minutes now. The 14 statements are on your table. If you can just have a reflection on those. And then we'll be coming back to register support for those. We're going to go across all 14 first and then look at the outcome at the end. Thank you. A bit like the biscuits before, just because 30-odd% of you liked caramel wafers, it doesn't mean that tea cakes are no longer going to be manufactured, okay? So it's not about dismissing things, it's just about gaining an insight into the level of support for the statements. Okay, is that clear? Okay, so Chris and I are going to handle this electronic marvel, and what we're going to do is, you all have a keypad in your hand. I am going to read each statement in turn. At the end of the statement, you will have an opportunity to register your support for it, with 5 being, I'm absolutely in support of this. Oh, there we are. This is the... Okay, so if you strongly agree with the statement, you'll go to 5. If you're kind of ambivalent, you'll go to 3, and if it's not your statement at all, you'll go to 1. But again, recognising that this is not to knock things out, because all of this rich material will be in the reports. It's really just to give us an indication of where support is lying at the moment. Okay, is everybody clear with that? Shall we start? So we're going to work. And the benefit of this is that we will all hear the 14 statements again as well. I'm going to read them, so I hope you don't get bored with my voice. So we're going to start with statement number 1. We want to help build an equal society where workers have fair work and pay conditions and a tax system that taxes wealth more fairly. If you could cast your vote on that. 5 if you strongly agree with it, working down to 1 if you strongly disagree. Okay, and we've got, okay, so if everybody can close off their votes there. Yes, everybody who has chosen to vote has voted. Great, okay. Right, moving on to statement 2. Every business needs to comply with new eco-laws which serves the needs of citizens first and foremost, and that includes free, accessible public transport, an effective environmental tax system, and the requirement for all new homes to be eco-homes that are accessible via government-issued eco-mortgage, issued at a preferential rate to support the access to the housing ladder. Again, We're just trying to test support for this statement. So if you could go 5 if you really support it, 4 if you agree, 3 if you're neither, 2 if you disagree, and 1 if you strongly disagree. And we're not going to leave you hanging. We are going to look at the results of all of these things just before we finish this afternoon. Okay, if anybody could vote any or make any last. Okay, we'll close that one off. Number 3, affordable and improved state-owned public transport that is joined up and a country-wide policy. So I'll say this for probably the last time, otherwise you'll be bored senseless. 5 if you strongly agree with that statement, 4 agree, 3 neither, 2 disagree, or 1 strongly disagree. Okay, if I could just call on anybody else who wants to make a final support on that, or not. Okay, we're going to move on. Number 4, fair use of personal and corporate taxation to redistribute wealth and as an incentive and disincentive for environmental sustainability. I think you know 5 if you're strongly in favour, down to 1 if you're not strongly in favour. So if you could cast your votes now. Okay, a couple of seconds, just if anybody's still considering. Okay, right, we'll move on. Number 5, build an energy efficient country. Okay, any last voting for that? Okay, number 6, investing and harnessing Scotland's renewable energy potential. Okay, any last consideration of that statement? Moving on to number 7, to reshape employment regulations such as abolishing 0 hours contracts and private employment agencies, and to ensure everyone has good and fair work that meets their needs and invests in their development. Okay, last few seconds for considering that statement. Number 8, the government needs to raise monies to meet opportunities of a sustainable country. This could be done through taxation, locally, nationally, and to companies, investing and rewarding positive behaviour and penalising negative behaviour. Okay, last few seconds for considering that statement. Thank you. Moving on to number 9, create positive destinations for all of our young people. Okay, a few more seconds if you want to consider that statement and give your preference. Okay, number 10. Every citizen must be better educated and informed about why their actions are essential to maintain our beautiful green country. A few more seconds to get last keypad. Okay, moving on. Number 11, transport. Addressing this encapsulates many of the problems we have: obesity, isolation, and climate change. If you could cast your votes. Okay, a few more seconds if anybody wants to consider this statement. Moving on to number 12. To build on Scotland's National Performance Framework by further investing in sustainable development, science and technology in Scottish manufacturing. Thank you. Just a few more seconds if anybody wants to give their opinion on this statement. Moving on to number 13. A 30-year national plan which politicians from every party signs up to. The plan will deliver a sustainable country balancing environment, economic and social impact for the good of the country and its citizens. There will be specific milestones and targets for politicians at all levels from national down to local authorities. Okay, a few more seconds if anybody wants to consider this statement. And moving on to our last statement, change the economic system by changing the tax system. Apologies, it should read change the economic balance by changing the tax system. Okay, a few more seconds if anybody wants to consider this statement and cast their final vote. Okay, so thank you. I hope you found that process straightforward. What we're going to do now is look at each of the statements in turn and just have a look at the support that's garnered individually in the room. And as I say, this is not about excluding things, it's just about giving us a measure of where we're at this point. So, moving further on. So, you can see with statement number 1 that it's falling broadly into the agree and strongly agree box. So that's 93% endorse statement 1. Number 2, slightly different makeup. Again, falling into the strongly agree and agree box, but kind of in reverse order from number 1. And interestingly, quite a strong middle ground there. Number 3, we are, again, I mean, it's not a huge surprise that we're agreeing or strongly agreeing with this because these statements have come from your deliberations, but it's just interesting to see how it falls. And in this one, we've got 1% strongly disagreeing with state-owned public transport. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, I apologise. Yes, of course we can. So back to number 1. Number one, we want to help build an equal society where workers have fair work and pay conditions and a tax system that taxes wealth more fairly. 60% strongly agree, 33% agree, 6% neither, nobody disagreed with it, and 1% strongly disagreed. Number two, every business needs to comply with new eco-laws which serve the needs of citizens first and foremost, and that includes free, accessible transport, an effective environmental tax system, and a requirement for all new homes to be eco-homes that are accessible via government-issued eco-mortgage issued at a preferential rate to support access to the housing ladder. 35% strongly agree, 38% agree, 17% neither, 8% disagreed, and 2% strongly disagreed. Number three, affordable and improved state-owned public transport that is a joined-up countrywide policy. 35% strongly agreed, 47% agreed, 10% neither, 6% disagreed, and 1% strongly disagreed. Fair use of personal and corporate taxation to redistribute wealth and as an incentive and disincentive for environmental sustainability. Sorry, that was, yeah, that's right. Yes. Yes. So strongly agree, 42%, 37% agree, 14% neither, 3% disagree, and 3% strongly disagree. Build an energy efficient country. Strongly agree, 55%, agree, 37%, neither, 6%, disagree, 1%, strongly disagree, 1%. Investing and harnessing Scotland's renewable energy potential. 66% strongly agree with the statement, 27% agree, 7% neither, 0% disagree, and 0% strongly disagree. Quite an interesting indication. To reshape employment regulations such as abolishing zero-hour contracts and private employment agencies, and to ensure everyone has good and fair work that meets their needs and invests in their development. 50% strongly agree, 33% agree, 9% neither, 6% disagree, and 2% strongly disagree. Number 8, the government needs to raise monies to meet opportunities of a sustainable country. This could be done through taxation, locally, nationally, and to companies, investing and rewarding positive behaviour and penalising negative behaviour. 30% strongly agree, 42% agree, 23% neither, 2% disagree, and 3% strongly disagree. Create positive destinations for all of our young people. Strongly agree, 35%, agree, 37%, neither, 19%, disagree, 2%, strongly disagree, 7%. Every citizen must be better educated and informed about why their actions are essential to maintain our beautiful green country. Strongly agree, 40%, agree, 37%, neither, 19%, disagree, 2%, and strongly disagree, 3%. Transport. Addressing this encapsulates many of the problems we have: obesity, isolation, climate change. Strongly agree, 16%, agree, 37%, neither, 35%, disagree, 8%, and strongly disagree, 5%. 12, to build on Scotland's national performance framework by further investing in sustainable development, science and technology in Scottish manufacturing. 36% strongly agree, 49% agree, 13% neither, 2% disagree, and nobody strongly disagrees with that. 13, a 30-year national plan which politicians from every party signs up to. The plan will deliver a sustainable country balancing environment, economic and social impact for the good of the country and its citizens. There will be specific milestones and targets for politicians at all levels from national down to local authorities. 41% strongly agree with that statement, 23% agree, 20% neither agree nor disagree, 11% disagree, and 4% strongly disagree. And finally, change the economic balance by changing the tax system. 44% strongly agree, 33% agree, 16% neither, 7% disagree, and 1% strongly agree. Okay, so thank you so much for undertaking that exercise. Thank you very much for Chris for managing it. As I said, it's not a kind of a prioritization. It was just to get a feel of where you as individually were in the room, also an overall feel for the Assembly, and it's something that we can share out. Yeah. Sorry, I know you're wanting to discuss and debate these things. Okay, can everybody hear me again? And it's something that we can take outside the room, thank you, and share with the population of Scotland and beyond and get their feelings on these statements. Okay, so thank you very much for that. And there will be a lot more information within the weekend reports that you'll be able to look at and reflect as we move forwards. I think we're kind of moving to a close now, and I just wanted to kind of make a few comments and a few note a few points that have been really quite that I've been struck by over the weekend. And I'm also going to ask Ian to say a few words about how we can take the incredibly rich information that you have been generating and deliberating over, and how we move that forward into future weekends. But first of all, I wanted to say I think it has been an incredibly hard-working weekend, and I wanted to recognise that, and also ask you to kind of give yourselves a round of applause to congratulate yourselves in. I know we said it was a hard working weekend the last time we met, but I think this weekend was even harder work. I believe some young people went to bed early last night, so maybe that's an indication of how hard we're driving you. But as I say, everything will be written up in reports, so it's not that we're losing things as we move along. It is going to be reported. And we'll also get the opportunity in future weekends to review again the recommendations that go into the final report, and kind of start thinking about the actions that need to be set against these recommendations. And in the meantime, we're going to take the recommendations that you're coming forwards with, and we're going to review them against, make an assessment of where the power lies to enable the kind of the levers to work to allow the recommendations to be made. So we'll be putting together a framework that shows you where your recommendations sit and where the complexity is of where the power lies connected to those. And as I said, we're going to be publishing your actions to the kind of the wider public, and getting a bit of a conversation going around public thought based on your 14 statements. So we're hoping that will give you more information, further evidence to allow you to help shape your recommendations. I mean, I think we've had, because we've had the time in the room to deliberate and discuss, we've maybe come up with things that you wouldn't get at a first thought. So if we put that out and get comment on that, it'll give you more evidence to help you shape your report and your recommendations. But as I said, that all the actions matter, and where there's strong crossover and strong kind of common ground, we'll be reflecting on that quite clearly. So I think at this point I'd like to hand over to Ian, who's going to give a bit of a reflection on the matters that are starting to matter most to you.
Thanks, Kate. Just to echo what she said, well done, everybody. Really hard work. I mean, one of the big issues for us in the Secretariat and in the design team was, what was your agenda going to be for this weekend? I mean, you had 353 statements, 67 statements, 22 statements. What really mattered? What did you really want to discuss? And that question is obviously still there and is obviously there for discussion. But I would just like to say, we felt that this sustainability statement, as Kate said yesterday, drew together an awful lot of threads of a lot of the ideas and things that you've said. And my instinct, I think, having talked to you and listened to you, is that worked really well for you and allowed you to give a very rich picture of the kind of country you're seeking to build. But no doubt you'll tell me if you don't think that's true, and we'll reflect on it further. But thank you very much, and we're incredibly proud of the work that you've done and really energised for thinking now about the next stages of this. So, you said yesterday that you wanted to have the political panel back and that you wanted to decide which questions to ask them, and that actually makes my life much easier, so thank you very much. So we'll be saying a little bit about the members' reference group in a few minutes, but I think I'm already saying to you, those of you who have volunteered for that, one of your main jobs will be to sift through those questions that your fellow members come up with to decide how best to manage that session and which questions to ask. So you won't be blaming me at that point. You'll be looking at your fellow members. But I think that's an ideal way, actually, of doing it, which will be really good. Now, I can't absolutely promise that the politicians will be back next weekend. They will definitely be back. They've promised they're coming back. We'll suggest next weekend, but maybe it'll be the weekend after, but it's definitely going to happen, okay? So just bear with me on that. There's a few things I think, though, that are useful for us to discuss, and as you go now into a few minutes reflection at the table about what has worked this weekend and anything you want to play back to us, and you'll have the survey reports and so on to capture a lot of that as well. Just a few things to invite you to think about and maybe give us some responses on. The first thing is, personally, I think the moving about rooms, the using the lecture theatre, using the breakout room, using this room, worked really well. We were kind of worried about it, but I'm now imagining having sat in here for a day and a half, what that would have felt like. So, we just need to grab the hotel's booking system and make sure that if there's any names for other people using any of these facilities on our weekends, that we try and cross those out and put our names in. But we will hopefully try and do something similar in the future if that's what you say to us you want. But I think that's my sense of it. So, political panel will kind of look after itself. You'll decide those questions. We'll build in plenty of time to have the kind of rich discussion that you want to have with them, and that'll be fantastic. I think, personally, as I've listened to this, that having Alan and Chris doing a bit of a mirror and a reflection and helping you think about the questions, about where power lies and how we do politics is a really good thing to be doing as well. So without giving the detail of it, I think that's something I'm interested in keeping going as well, and I've already signed them up for the next few weekends. I think we could, Kate mistakenly said at one point we're here for, was it 6 years? It kind of feels like we really ought to be, so, but I haven't got the budget for it, unfortunately. But hopefully there will be more than 6 years of citizens' assemblies in Scotland to follow from this. So how we do politics and where power lies, I think, is a really important thing. I'm really keen to introduce you to local politicians as well. COSLA, Conventional Scottish Local Authorities, they had an observer here yesterday. Their politicians are very interested in coming along to talk to you about how they try to engage citizens at a local level in decision-making, things like participatory budgeting and so on. I think that would be a really interesting thing to explore a bit of. And really importantly, Alan touched on a bit as well, is how are citizens involved, not just in Scotland, but around the world in citizens' assemblies and similar kind of initiatives, and how is information used in the political system. I think that's another theme we want to start to draw out as we start to move towards the end of our process that I think will be really useful in thinking about your recommendations. So that's another area that I think might be quite useful. There's two specific themes that I'm interested in your thoughts on. First, we've had a lot about tax and budgets, and about how decisions are taken about the use of resources. And as we look at all the 14 areas of action that you've identified, I think there's some more information that you need about how all that works, where those powers lie, how it's evolved, and how decisions are taken about them. And essentially, that kind of affordability thing about Scotland, where do we use our resources at the moment, and what do we think we can afford? And we've still got the unanswered questions from weekend one about the Constitution and about tax and about money and where revenue is raised and affordability. So there's something about maybe a session on that which underpins a lot of the things that you've done here as you start to think about recommendations at the end. That would be quite useful to come back to. And the other thing, which is just a big theme that we had in last weekend in priorities, and I think is another aspect of sustainability, is health and well-being and improving outcomes for us as people and living long, healthy lives. So whether there's a dimension of sustainability around health and healthy outcomes and thinking about the health resources and how people are involved in the healthcare system that you might want to explore as well. Now, there's probably more things we could add to that list, and I think some of you will be thinking, my God, he's made us work hard. 3 weekends, what's it going to be like the next 3? That's the kind of scale of ambition that I've got to be sharing with you. Weekends 5 and 6, we do need to start to pull all this together. But as we're thinking about the agenda for weekend 4 and a bit into weekend 5, just as you have your table chat just now, just have a little bit of a think about some of that. play back any points via the facilitators. We'll have the reference group as well. And obviously, we're just on the end of a phone or the end of an email, so just get in touch about us as well. Okay? So thank you very much. But again, from me and the Secretariat, fantastic weekend, really well done.
Okay, everyone. Hello. Okay, everyone. So what we're going to do now for the next 10 minutes or so is just have a reflection at tables about process. So everything that Kate shared with you at the end there, that Ian's just shared with you, and your experience of the process this weekend. Some members have already said they'd like to talk about things like the balance of time we have for things like deliberation, the kind of lengths of the breaks that we have as we go through the agenda, the way that we have discussions and kind of work through things. So what we really want you to think about now is process. And the feedback that you give at your tables, it will be captured and it absolutely will be fed to the convener and the secretariat, the design team and others that are helping here to kind of set the agenda for the next weekend, as well as, of course, the members' reference group that we'll be able to tell you a little bit more about in a minute. So I'm going to hand over to you just to have that discussion about process, but please share openly as you can, say anything you like. It's all really, really helpful for us. Thank you. Okay, if you could wrap up your conversations, please. We haven't got too long left, really. Thank you so much. Well, we're nearly there. We're nearly there. There are a few more things that we need to do. Everything that you've just fed back there about process is being captured, and we will look at it. We will read it. It's really important that we do, and we know that. Of course, if there's anything you also additionally want to share on your feedback forms or anything like that, please do so. Please do use that space. And don't forget that you can talk to us directly. And of course, you can also talk to the Secretariat, who will be over at the registration desk for about an hour after the event if there's anything that you want to pick up with them. So my final job for the day, so this is the last time you're going to hear from me, is just to give you a brief recap of the weekend. So I know you know what you've done, but just to remind you about the progress that we've made over the course of this weekend. We know that there's been quite a lot of information. You've been having the chance to hear from a range of different people about constitutional options. You've got a situational report about that. And we went into a panel with some politicians where you had the chance to ask the questions that were on your mind. And as we know, when we did that vote, when you had a chance to talk about member points and process before yesterday, that panel is going to be coming back. So we're going to have another politicians panel later in the process. So we spent a lot of time thinking about constitutional options, and then we moved on to a substantive discussion about one of the things that came out of the previous weekend around sustainability, and how we balance that environmental, that economic, and that social aspect of sustainability. And you talked a lot about priority areas of action in relation to that statement, and you came and you really, really expertly shared that with the rest of the group and kind of considered what that meant and what that meant for some of the constitutional options and where power lied in relation to helping to achieve the goals there. So we've done a lot of thinking, a lot of learning, a lot of deliberation. So I think these are the longest deliberation sessions we have so far. And just talking to some of you over the course of the weekend, I know there's still a question about how we balance deliberation, how we balance information, and we balance breaks, and we balance all the things that we do. And again, that's a very serious thing for us to consider, that we try and keep getting that right. And people will probably have different preferences, but all of the feedback that you keep giving us on process is helping us just to make those tweaks, to try and make things as you want them to be. So please do keep giving us this continuous feedback. Just a few points that I need to make before we leave. So as I said, the registration desk is open for the next hour. Just another, I think this is the third reminder, about expenses. Please make sure you do that before you leave. If you are getting a bus to the station, you can get that from outside after we conclude at 1:30. And if you've ordered a packed lunch in advance, you can pick up your lunch and be on your way. I have one fun thing as well to tell you about next weekend. So we've had a few requests from people that those that can play instruments, maybe next weekend, probably Saturday night, get together for a wee jam. So, right, good times. So, if you would like, if you play an instrument, Or if you don't, you just kind of want to ding some glasses, because I think we have quite a crew of people dinging glasses now. Please bring your instruments, and on Saturday night next weekend, we'll figure out how we can have a jam. And I'm sure they'll be happy to have an audience for those that want to get stuck in. So instruments next weekend if you'd like to bring them. Right, we have one important task before we leave, and that is to fill out our research questionnaires. Very, very important part of the process. And it really is a very important part of the process. So yeah, just spend a little time doing that. And then Kate is going to come back to do the formal thanks and the formal close. And, very exciting, tell you who's on the members' reference group. So you're going to find out before we leave. But Kate's going to do that after we've done our research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. The research is obviously a crucial part of our journey. So I'd be very pleased if you could give it your best consideration. But you do know that whenever you hear my voice, we are very, very near the end of our journey. So I'm just going to wrap up just before the lunchtime. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk a little bit about the reference group. I was absolutely heartened that over nearly a fifth of the Assembly members had put their names forward for the reference group, which I think it says quite a lot about your commitment to this process and your willingness to be involved. What we have done is selected out of a hat, or out of two little jars, 6 members who are going to work with us as of now, but because there is such a lot of people involved in this, we'll probably work out some kind of rolling system for people to get involved in this. But for today's purposes, the reference group will be, as of today, David Barton, and if David's here, if you could give us a wave. Oh, David in the middle there. Alexander Robin. Alexander? Yeah, oh, lovely. Alexander at the back. Dave Smith. Dave here. Julie Buggy. Julie, great. Lisa McGee. Lisa, thank you. And Grace Tomley. Grace, lovely. Okay, so if you're happy to, yes, a round of applause, thank you. Okay, so thank you to everybody who put your name forward. As I said, because there is such a high volume of people wanting to get involved, we'll probably work out some system across the way to make sure we harness that enthusiasm. So I just wanted to finish now very briefly by saying it has been my absolute honour and privilege to work with you across this weekend. It's clear that your passion and commitment has been manifested, I think, and we've really had a very important and pivotal weekend for the Assembly. The threads that have run through that, I feel, are the commonality of aims, the desire for mature discussion, the honesty with which we've approached it around what we can do and what we can't do, and I think most importantly for me, the value that has been put on this process from you as individuals, from everybody involved in the room, from our guest speakers and evidence givers, and from the politicians. So it is incredibly clear, more so now than I think at the beginning, that your work is important and that your assembly is important. And I want to commend you for your input. I want to thank the Secretariat, the stewarding group, the observers, and everybody else who's involved this weekend, because I think we can now kind of see clearly that this event, this experience, can fulfill the ambition that your input will enable those who make the decisions to take the long-term view and consider fully the hard choices that you know need to be made in the building of our future Scotland. So I think on that incredible note, I'd like to thank you again for your input, wish you a very happy 4 weeks, and I will look forward to working with you again when we meet again in February. Thank you so much.